Arizona Territory. 1889 hooves thundered across the dusty plain as Hannah Collins pulled hard on the reins, bringing her exhausted mare to a halt atop the ridge. Sweat plastered her cotton blouse to her back, and her hands ached from the long journey. Before her stretched the sagebrush valley, a sea of golden grass framed by distant purple mountains, and nestled in its heart stood the Starlight Ranch, her last hope and final destination. "This better be worth it," she muttered, adjusting her worn hat against the setting sun. The advertisement had been blunt. Ranch cook wanted. Hard work. Low pay. Isolated location. 3 previous cooks had quit within a month. No one in the nearest town would take the position. But Hannah had nowhere else to go, and the rumors of the ranch owner's impossible standards didn't frighten a woman who had buried her parents, lost their farm to creditors, and traveled halfway across the country alone. As Hannah approached the main house, a sturdy 2-story structure with a wide porch and weather-beaten shutters, she noticed a tall figure emerging from the barn. Even at a distance, she could tell he moved with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to commanding respect. His dark hair fell just below his collar, and his face bore the weathered look of a man who spent his days under the relentless western sun. "You must be the new cook," he called out, his voice carrying across the yard. Hannah straightened in her saddle. "I am. Hannah Collins." "You're 2 days late," he said, approaching her horse and looking up with piercing blue eyes. "Wagon broke down near Tucson. Had to wait for repairs." She held his gaze, refusing to be intimidated. A moment passed between them, an unspoken assessment, before he nodded once. "I'm Kieran Sutherland. This is my ranch." He reached up to help her dismount, his hands strong and calloused as they circled her waist. Hannah felt an unexpected flutter in her chest as her boots touched the ground. She quickly stepped away, brushing dust from her riding skirt. "I'm ready to start work immediately, Mr. Sutherland." His mouth quirked slightly. "Good, because dinner was supposed to be ready an hour ago, and I have 7 hungry ranch hands who've been eating their own cooking for 3 days." He gestured toward the house. "Kitchen's through there. Your quarters are off the back porch. I'll need to know what supplies you have and what you expect," Hannah said, retrieving her satchel from the saddle. "Simple food, well prepared on time. That's all I expect." His eyes narrowed. "Think you can manage that, Miss Collins?" The challenge in his voice kindled something in her. Determination, pride, perhaps a touch of defiance. "I wouldn't be here if I couldn't, Mr. Sutherland." For the first time, a genuine smile crossed his face, transforming his stern features. "We'll see." As Hannah watched him stride away, she took a deep breath. She had expected hardship, isolation, and grueling work. What she hadn't expected was the way her heart had quickened when Kieran Sutherland smiled, or the inexplicable feeling that, despite everything, she might have found exactly where she was meant to be. By the time Hannah had explored the kitchen, surprisingly well-stocked but desperately in need of organization, she barely had time to throw together a meal before the ranch hands came stomping in. She managed a hearty stew from leftover beef, fresh biscuits, and apple cobbler that had the men staring in disbelief. "This is real food," declared an older cowboy who introduced himself as Frank. "Actual edible food." "What were you eating before?" Hannah asked as she refilled coffee cups. "Whatever didn't run away fast enough," laughed a younger man named Charlie. "Boss tried cooking himself for a while, but that's enough, Charlie," Kieran interrupted from the doorway. The men immediately straightened in their chairs. Hannah noticed how Kieran's eyes widened slightly when he tasted the stew, though he said nothing. He ate methodically, occasionally glancing at her as she moved about the kitchen. When he finished, he simply nodded once and left, but she could tell. He was surprised, perhaps even impressed. After cleaning up, Hannah finally collapsed onto the narrow bed in her quarters. The room was small but private, with a window overlooking a kitchen garden gone wild with neglect. In the moonlight, she could make out herbs and vegetables struggling amid the weeds. Tomorrow, she decided, she would begin to set things right, both in the kitchen and in the garden. She fell asleep wondering why Kieran Sutherland, with his imposing presence and impressive ranch, seemed to carry such a weight of solitude around him. By the end of her first week, Hannah had established a routine. Up before dawn to start breakfast, tend to the garden during midday, prepare lunch and dinner, and collapse into bed by nightfall. Her hands were raw from work, But there was satisfaction in seeing the kitchen transformed and hearing the appreciative comments from the ranch hands. Kieran remained reserved, though she often caught him watching her. Sometimes he would linger after meals, drinking coffee while she cleaned up, occasionally asking brief questions about her background. "You're not from Arizona," he observed one evening as she wiped down counters. "Nebraska originally. Our farm failed after my parents died." Hannah didn't mention the cruel cousin who had claimed their property, or the fiancé who had abandoned her when her prospects dimmed. Kieran nodded thoughtfully. "Farming's a hard life. So is ranching, from what I've seen." "True enough." His fingers traced the rim of his cup. "But worth it when the land speaks to you." Hannah paused in her work, struck by the unexpected poetry in his words. "Does it speak to you?" His eyes met hers, intense and unexpectedly vulnerable. "Every day? That's why I'm still here when others have given up and moved on." In that moment, something shifted between them, a recognition, perhaps, of a shared understanding. Then the moment passed as he stood abruptly, thanked her for the meal, and strode out into the night. The next morning, Hannah was weeding the garden when she heard approaching footsteps. Looking up, she shielded her eyes against the sun to see Kieran, holding a large straw hat. "You'll burn in this, son," he said, extending the hat toward her. "Can't have my cook incapacitated." Hannah accepted it with surprise. "Thank you, Mr. Sutherland." "Kieran," he corrected, then hesitated. "That garden hasn't looked this good in years." "It just needed attention," Hannah replied, settling the hat on her head. Like most things, his expression changed, a flash of something like pain crossing his features before he masked it. "We're riding out to check the north pasture. Be back by dinner." As he walked away, Hannah wondered about the sadness she occasionally glimpsed beneath his composed exterior. The ranch hands were friendly but tight-lipped about their boss, though she had gathered that Kieran had inherited the ranch from his father several years ago and had worked tirelessly to make it profitable despite drought, rustlers, and falling cattle prices. What none of them mentioned, and what Hannah had begun to suspect, was just how lonely a life it was for a man who carried the responsibility of the entire ranch on his shoulders. One afternoon in her third week, Hannah was startled by the sound of shouting from the yard. Rushing to the porch, she saw ranch hands running toward the corral where a magnificent black stallion was rearing wildly, fighting against the ropes that held him. "He's too wild," Charlie yelled as Kieran approached the frenzied animal. "That Mustang's never going to break." "Every horse can be gentled," Kieran replied calmly, though Hannah could see the tension in his shoulders. "He just needs patience." For nearly an hour, Hannah watched as Kieran worked with the stallion, his movements slow and deliberate, his voice a steady murmur too low for her to make out the words. Gradually, the horse's resistance lessened, though it still stamped and snorted nervously. When Kieran finally stepped away, his shirt was soaked with sweat, and there was a long scratch down his forearm where the rope had caught him. Without thinking, Hannah hurried to the kitchen and returned with clean cloths and a basin of water. "It needs cleaning," she said, gesturing to his arm as he approached the house. "It's nothing," he insisted, but he followed her to the porch and sat on the step beside her, extending his arm with reluctance. Hannah gently cleaned the wound, acutely aware of his gaze on her face and the warmth of his skin beneath her fingers. "That horse is beautiful," she said to break the silence. "What will you call him?" "Tempest," Kieran replied, watching as she wrapped a bandage around his arm. "He reminds me of something wild and unstoppable." "Like a storm," Hannah agreed, securing the bandage. "Yes." His voice softened. "Or like certain people who come into your life unexpectedly." Hannah's hands stilled, and she looked up to find his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a suspended moment, she thought he might say more, or perhaps even reach for her. Instead, he stood abruptly. "Thank you for the bandage, Miss Collins." "Hannah," she corrected quietly. "If I'm to call you Kieran, then you should call me Hannah." A smile touched his lips. "Hannah, then." He looked at her for another long moment before turning away. "Dinner at the usual time?" "Of course." As he walked toward the barn, Hannah pressed her hand against her heart, surprised by its rapid beating. She had come to the Starlight Ranch for a job, nothing more. Developing feelings for her employer would be foolish, especially when she knew nothing of his past, or whether he even saw her as anything more than his cook. Yet as she returned to the kitchen, Hannah couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her at the memory of his smile when he spoke her name. The weeks stretched into months, and summer blazed across the valley. Hannah settled deeper into life at the ranch, her role expanding beyond cooking as she took on mending, tending to minor injuries, and even helping with the ranch accounts when she revealed her skill with numbers. "Where did you learn bookkeeping?" Kieran asked one evening as they sat at the kitchen table, ledgers spread before them. "My father believed girls should be educated," Hannah explained, tallying a column of figures. "He taught me mathematics and hired a teacher from town for literature and history. My mother thought it was excessive, but she allowed it." Kieran watched her work, his expression thoughtful. "Your father sounds like a forward-thinking man." "He was." Hannah smiled at the memory. "He used to say that the West needed women with both strong backs and strong minds." "He was right," Kieran said softly. "This territory needs more women like you." Their eyes met across the table, and Hannah felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. These quiet evenings had become the highlight of her days, moments when Kieran seemed to lower his guard and speak more freely. She had learned about his childhood on the ranch, his time at a school back east that he had hated, and his return home after his father's heart failed. What he never mentioned was why 3 cooks had left before her arrival, or why the townsfolk seemed to think working for Kieran Sutherland was a punishment. The man she had come to know was demanding but fair, private but not cruel. Something didn't add up. Her chance to understand came unexpectedly when she traveled to town for supplies with Charlie, who became talkative after a few drinks at the general store. "Boss is different since you came," Charlie remarked as they loaded the wagon. "Talks more. Even laughed last week when Frank's horse threw him in that mud puddle." Hannah hesitated, then asked the question that had lingered for months. "Charlie, why did the other cooks leave?" "Mr. Sutherland." "Kieran, he's not the ogre everyone made him out to be." Charlie's expression sobered. It wasn't him so much as what happened at the ranch. His wife, Elena, she died there 3 years ago. Childbirth. Baby too. Hit him hard. Charlie lowered his voice. The cooks couldn't stand his silences, or maybe they reminded him too much of what he'd lost. He'd go days without speaking, work himself to exhaustion. Some said the place was haunted by her spirit. Hannah absorbed this information in stunned silence. Kieran had been married, had lost not only a wife, but a child. The weight he carried wasn't just the ranch, it was grief. "He's different now," Charlie continued, oblivious to her shock. "Since you came. Like he's waking up again." On the ride back to the ranch, Hannah could think of nothing else. Every interaction with Kieran replayed in her mind, now colored by the knowledge of his loss. The way he sometimes stopped mid-sentence, staring at something only he could see. How he avoided certain rooms in the main house. His reluctance to discuss the future. When they returned, Kieran was waiting in the yard. Their eyes met, and Hannah felt a new ache in her chest. Not just attraction now, but compassion, understanding, and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. "Welcome back," he said simply. Hannah nodded, suddenly uncertain how to act with this new knowledge between them, though he didn't know she possessed it. "I should start dinner." In the kitchen, she moved mechanically through the preparations, her mind elsewhere. She had begun to care deeply for Kieran Sutherland, perhaps even to love him. But now she understood the true challenge wasn't just earning his trust. It was helping him believe he deserved a second chance at happiness. And she wasn't certain either of them was ready for that. Autumn brought cooler temperatures and cattle drives as Kieran prepared to sell part of his herd before winter. The ranch buzzed with activity, and Hannah found herself cooking for additional hands hired temporarily for the drive. The night before Kieran was to leave with the cattle, Hannah prepared his favorite meal, beef stew with dumplings, fresh bread, and apple pie. The other men had already eaten and departed for the bunkhouse when Kieran came in, looking tired but satisfied. "Everything's ready for tomorrow," he said, washing his hands at the sink. "We should be back in 2 weeks, if all goes well." Hannah nodded, setting his plate before him. "I've packed provisions for the journey." "Thank you." He sat down, but didn't immediately begin eating. "Hannah, I've been meaning to ask you something." Her heart quickened. "Yes. Your agreement was for 6 months. That time is almost up." His eyes met hers, unreadable in the lamplight. "Will you be staying on after?" The question caught her off guard, though she had been thinking about it herself. "I haven't decided," she answered honestly. Kieran looked down at his plate. "The ranch has improved with you here. The men are happier, better fed. The house feels He paused, searching for words. More like a home again. I've been happy here, Hannah said softly. Happier than I expected to be. He nodded, still not meeting her eyes. Whatever you decide, you'll have a good reference from me. Though I hope. He stopped abruptly, then began again. The ranch would benefit from your continued presence. The ranch, Hannah noted. Not I would benefit, or I hope you'll stay. Always that distance, that careful formality that had begun to recede but never fully disappeared. I'll give it serious thought while you're gone, she promised. They ate in companionable silence, but Hannah felt a tension between them, unspoken words hovering like the first snow clouds gathering on the horizon. After dinner, as Hannah wiped down the table, Kieran lingered by the door. If there's trouble while I'm gone, Frank knows what to do. But the ranch has been quiet lately. We'll manage, Hannah assured him. He nodded, then surprised her by taking a step closer. Hannah, he stopped, and she could see conflict in his expression. Yes, she prompted gently. For a moment, she thought he might finally bridge the gap between them. Instead, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small book. I thought you might enjoy this while we're gone. I noticed you like to read in the evenings. Hannah accepted the volume, a collection of poetry by Robert Browning. Thank you, she said, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. Good night, Hannah, he said softly, and then he was gone, leaving her holding the book and wondering what he had truly wanted to say. The first week of Kieran's absence passed uneventfully. Hannah kept busy with her usual duties, though cooking for the few remaining hands required less effort. She spent her evenings reading the poetry book Kieran had given her, finding herself drawn to the love poems and wondering if he had selected the volume for that reason. On the 8th day, a fierce storm blew in from the mountains, bringing howling winds and driving rain that quickly turned to sleet as temperatures dropped. Hannah worried about Kieran and his men caught in the open during such weather. By nightfall, the storm had intensified. Hannah had just finished securing the shutters on the main house when she heard shouting from the direction of the barn. Grabbing a lantern, she hurried across the yard, nearly blown off her feet by a powerful gust. Frank met her at the barn door, his face grim. Tempest gone wild in the storm broke through his stall. Inside, Hannah saw the magnificent black stallion rearing and kicking, eyes rolling in terror at each crash of thunder. 2 ranch hands were attempting to corner him, but the horse was too frightened and powerful. He'll hurt himself, Frank shouted over the noise. Or someone else. Hannah remembered how Kieran had gentled the horse months ago, his calm voice, his slow movements. Without stopping to think, she set down her lantern and stepped forward. Miss Collins, don't, Charlie called. That horse is dangerous. Hannah ignored him, focusing entirely on the frightened animal. Easy, Tempest, she said, keeping her voice steady and low despite her racing heart. Easy now. The stallion's eyes fixed on her, nostrils flaring. She continued to speak soothingly, moving slowly closer, her hand extended palm up. You're safe here. Nothing's going to hurt you. Time seemed to suspend as Hannah and the horse regarded each other. Gradually, Tempest's breathing slowed, and his wild rearing subsided to nervous stamping. When Hannah finally touched his neck, the stallion shuddered but didn't pull away. That's it, she murmured, stroking his sleek coat. That's a good boy. By the time she had led Tempest back to his stall, secured the door, and turned around, the ranch hands were staring at her with undisguised amazement. Never seen anything like it, Frank said, shaking his head. Except when the boss does it. Hannah felt a strange pride at the comparison, though her hands were shaking from the aftermath of fear. He just needed reassurance. They returned to the house, where Hannah prepared hot coffee for everyone. As they warmed themselves by the kitchen stove, Frank studied her with newfound respect. You've got a way about you, Miss Collins, he said finally. A steadiness. Like the boss. Hannah smiled, though her thoughts turned worriedly to Kieran out in the storm. Let's hope they've found shelter tonight. Later, alone in her room, Hannah opened Kieran's poetry book and found a passage that had been marked with a pressed wildflower. Grow old along with me. The best is yet to be. The last of life, for which the first was made. Her fingers traced the delicate petals of the flower, a golden columbine that grew in the high meadows near the ranch. Had Kieran marked this passage for her to find? Was it a message, an invitation, a hope? For the first time, Hannah allowed herself to imagine a future at Starlight Ranch not as a cook, but as something more, a partner, a wife, perhaps someday a mother. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. She had come here seeking only employment and had found something far more precious, a place that felt like home, and a man who, despite his reserve, had awakened her heart. But did Kieran feel the same? And even if he did, could he overcome the grief of his past to embrace a new beginning? The cattle drive returned 3 days later than expected, the men weary and mud-splattered from battling the storm and its aftermath. Hannah had spent those days in anxious anticipation, scanning the horizon frequently for signs of their return. When she finally spotted riders approaching, she hurried to the porch, her eyes searching for Kieran's familiar figure. She found him leading the group, his shoulders squared despite obvious exhaustion. The moment he dismounted and looked up to see her waiting, something in his expression changed, a softening, a relief that mirrored her own. He handed his reins to Charlie and crossed to where she stood. "Hannah," he said simply, as if her name contained everything he needed to express. "Welcome home," she replied, noticing a cut above his eye and the careful way he held his left arm. "You're hurt." "Nothing serious. The storm caught us in the pass. Lost 2 steers, but all the men are safe." His eyes never left her face. "How is everything here?" "We had some excitement with Tempest during the storm," she said, "but otherwise fine." Concern crossed his features. "Tempest? Was anyone hurt?" "No, I managed to calm him down." Kieran's eyebrows rose. "You did?" Frank, passing by with supplies, interjected. "Should have seen her, boss. Walked right up to that crazy horse like she was approaching a kitten. Never flinched, even when he nearly took her head off with those hooves. Talked him gentle, just like you do." Kieran's expression transformed from surprise to something Hannah couldn't quite name. Admiration, perhaps, mixed with a deeper emotion that made her cheeks warm. "You should tend to that cut," she said, changing the subject. "And your arm." "After I've seen to the men and the cattle," he replied, though his gaze lingered on her face. "But I'll be in for dinner." That evening, after the other men had eaten and departed, Kieran sat at the kitchen table while Hannah cleaned his wound and examined his arm, which she determined was badly bruised but not broken. "You should have let me do this earlier," she scolded gently, applying salve to the cut. "I've had worse." He winced slightly at her touch. "Frank told me more about what happened with Tempest. You could have been seriously injured. So could the horse, or the men." She concentrated on her task, aware of his eyes studying her face. "Sometimes you have to face what frightens you." "Is that what you were doing?" "Facing what frightened you." Hannah's hands paused, sensing they were no longer just talking about the horse. "Yes," she said softly, "and discovering I was stronger than I thought." Kieran caught her wrist as she withdrew her hand. "Hannah, He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. "I found myself thinking of you during the storm, wondering if you were safe, wanting to be here, not out there." Her heart quickened at his touch and his words. "I worried about you too." "Did you find the passage in the book?" he asked, his voice low and uncertain. "Yes," she whispered, "with the columbine." His fingers tightened slightly around her wrist. "I'm not good with words. Not like those poets. But when I gave you that book, I hoped you might understand what I couldn't say." "And what was that, Kieran?" Hannah's voice was barely audible, even to her own ears. He released her wrist and stood abruptly, moving to the window where rain still streaked the glass. "That I've come to care for you. More than I thought possible. More than I believed I could ever care for anyone again." He kept his back to her, his shoulders tense. "But I have no right to ask anything of you." Hannah rose and moved to stand beside him. "Why not?" "Because I failed before," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "I couldn't protect Elena. Or our child. What right do I have to happiness when they're gone?" Finally, the truth was between them. Hannah's heart ached for his pain, but she refused to let him retreat behind it again. "Kieran, look at me," she said gently. When he turned, the anguish in his eyes nearly undid her resolve. "You didn't fail. Sometimes tragedy happens despite our best efforts. But refusing to live fully doesn't honor their memory. It only creates more loss." "You don't understand." "I understand grief," she interrupted. "I understand loneliness. And I understand that when you find something precious, something that makes your heart feel whole again, you should hold on to it with both hands." His expression changed, hope warring with fear. "Is that what you found here, Hannah? Something precious?" She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. I came here for a job nobody wanted. I found a home, and a man I've grown to love. Kieran's breath caught audibly at her declaration. For a moment, he stood frozen, as if unable to believe what he'd heard. Then, with aching slowness, he raised his hand to her cheek. I thought I would spend the rest of my life alone, he whispered, until you arrived and brought light back into this place, into my life. When his lips finally met hers, Hannah felt as though something long broken inside her was finally healing. His kiss was tender at first, then deepened with a hunger that matched her own. His arms encircled her, drawing her close against his chest, where she could feel the rapid beating of his heart. When they eventually parted, breathless, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he said simply. Not as my cook. Stay as my wife, if you'll have me. Hannah smiled, tears of joy blurring her vision. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll stay. They were married on a crisp October morning, with the mountains wearing their first dusting of snow and the valley glowing golden in autumn light. The ceremony took place on the ranch, with a minister brought from town and the ranch hands serving as witnesses. Hannah wore a dress of deep blue silk that Kieran had ordered from Denver, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Kieran, nearly unrecognizable in a new suit, could not take his eyes off her as they spoke their vows beneath an arch of aspens. I promise to cherish you all the days of my life, he said, his voice steady and sure as he slipped a gold band onto her finger. To build a future of joy and hope with you, here on this land we both love. Hannah blinked back tears as she placed a matching ring on his hand. I promise to stand by your side through all seasons, to face whatever comes together, and to fill our home with love and laughter for all the years to come. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful, with music from Charlie's fiddle and dancing that lasted well into the night. As evening fell, Kieran led Hannah away from the festivities and up to the main house, to rooms she had cleaned but never occupied, now transformed with fresh paint and new furnishings. This is our home now, he said, watching her face as she took in the master bedroom with its large four-poster bed and windows overlooking the valley. I had the men working on it while I was away on the cattle drive, and finishing touches while we were planning the wedding. It's beautiful, Hannah whispered, touched by the care he had taken to make it new, free from painful memories. Kieran drew her into his arms, his expression tender. You are what makes it beautiful. You've brought paradise back to Starlight Ranch, Hannah Sutherland. In that moment, as his lips met hers and the last light of day painted the room in gold, Hannah knew she had indeed found paradise, not in a place, but in the love they had built together and the future that stretched before them, as vast and promising as the western sky. Spring came early to Sagebrush Valley the following year. The meadows erupted in wildflowers, the cattle grew fat on fresh grass, and Hannah's garden flourished under her attentive care. But the most beautiful blossoming was the one no one could see, the child growing beneath Hannah's heart, their presence announced to an overjoyed Kieran on a warm April evening. His face had paled at first, old fears briefly resurfacing, but Hannah had taken his hand and placed it over her still flat stomach. This child will be born of love and hope, she had said firmly, not fear. By summer, the evidence of her condition could no longer be hidden, and Kieran grew both protective and proud, insisting she rest more, while simultaneously telling everyone who visited the ranch about his forthcoming child. On a perfect September afternoon, as golden light bathed the valley, their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that declared her ready to embrace life. They named her Eleanor, for Hannah's mother, with Elena as her middle name, a tribute to the past, while celebrating the present. She has your eyes, Kieran whispered as he held his daughter for the first time, wonder and love illuminating his face. And your spirit, I think. But your stubborn chin, Hannah teased weakly from the bed, exhausted but radiantly happy. As the child grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. Kieran's increasing success allowed them to hire more help, including a young woman from town who took over most of the cooking duties, though Hannah still baked bread each morning and prepared Sunday dinners. Their home became known for its hospitality, with travelers and neighbors alike welcomed at their table. The rumors that had once circulated about the grim, haunted Starlight Ranch faded, replaced by stories of the Sutherlands' generosity and the beauty of the place they had created together. On their third anniversary, Kieran surprised Hannah with a picnic in the high meadow where columbines grew wild. Eleanor, now a lively 2-year-old with her father's dark hair and her mother's determined spirit, chased butterflies while they spread a blanket in the shade of an old cottonwood. "Do you remember what this place was like when you arrived?" Kieran asked, watching their daughter with evident pride. Hannah smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "A ranch in need of care, with a kitchen garden gone to seed, and a very demanding boss." He laughed, pulling her closer. "And now?" She turned to face him, cupping his cheek in her palm. "Now it's paradise," she said simply. "Because we built it together." "No regrets?" he asked, a trace of vulnerability still visible in his eyes after all this time. "About taking the job nobody wanted?" Hannah kissed him gently, pouring all her love into the gesture. "It was the best decision I ever made," she whispered against his lips. "And I would make it again every day for the rest of my life." As Eleanor's laughter rang out across the meadow and Kieran's arms encircled her waist, Hannah knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just a job or a home, but her true destiny, a love that had healed them both and created something beautiful and lasting in this wild, magnificent corner of the West.